Chapter 25. The members of Renegade's squad were not doing very well. The psychotic torture droid by the name of Rip Claw had injected the other 5 clones with who knew what, and Scud's condition worsened as time wore on. Scud's breathing was labored and he wheezed and rasped. He'd grown too weak to even cough. He would have vomited had he eaten something, but since the droids were practically starving them, Scud's ended up dry heaving instead. His temperature was still elevated and his face had grown unnaturally pale. His strength had all but diminished and he hung loosely in his chains like a rag doll, no longer able to support himself. The other clones had tried questioning him to see what was wrong, but Scud's was incoherent and mumbled a bunch of undistinguishable nonsense. It wasn't long before Clapper and Skids began to display signs of illness. That was more or less to be expected since they were both chained up right next to Scud's. Rip Claw returned to inject all of the clones including Scud's later that evening. It seemed that they had all now become part of some hellish biowarfare experiment. Rusty had the sinking feeling that Scud's wasn't going to be with them much longer. The leader of Renegade's squad no longer had any optimistic moral boosters for the other troopers. They all knew they were doomed. "I can't believe we are going to die like this," Skids shook his head sadly. "Yeah, you'd think that General Grievous would have been the one to personally torture us, but he hasn't been here since the first day we arrived." "How long has it been?" Avalanche questioned morosely. "I've honestly lost count," Rusty admitted. "It feels like it's been at least 2 weeks, Clapper muttered. "Hey Scuds, can you hear me?" Rusty questioned softly at his semi-conscious subordinate. A weak groan was his only response. "All right, brother, save your strength." The clones remained silent with the exception of a few encouraging remarks to their deathly ill brother. A few hours later, Rip Claw returned, only this time he injected everyone but Scud's. The droid then unshackled the deathly ill clone and dragged him out of the room. Rusty strained against his chains and screamed at the torture droid. "Where are you taking him, you heartless pile of scrap? Take me instead." Rip Claw glanced in Rusty's direction and laughed darkly. "Don't fret. There is plenty of fun yet to come." With those dread-inducing words, Grievous's droid left the other 5 clones alone. Everyone remained silent for the longest time as the bleakness of their predicament weighed heavily down on them. Soon one of them hatched a brilliant idea. "I know that everything is pretty damn hopeless right now, but I don't want to give up just yet. I have an idea. What if I pretend to be as ill as Scud's? If Rip Claw buys it, and he removes my restraints, I might be able to break free of this cell." Skids perked up instantly as he shared his plan. "How will you get past a whole ship full of clankers?" Avalanche shook his head with a bleak look in his eyes. "I'll overpower one of them and take a blaster. I'll come back to free you all. We can shoot our way out or die trying. Anything is worth a shot at this point. If you are feeling up to the task, by all means, do it," Swift encouraged. "Wait just a minute. You guys are forgetting something crucial. If we are carrying a deadly virus, all we'll end up doing is infecting anyone else we come in contact with," Rusty reminded them. "Then we won't leave this ship. We stand and fight. It's preferable than allowing them to torture and slaughter us like animals," Avalanche nodded in resignation. After all, their lives were already forfeit. "Very well. Start practicing for your debut, Skids. You need to be believable enough." Renegade's squad's hopes were thus restored. They had one chance, and one chance only. The other 4 clones could only hope that Skids would be able to pull it off. General Grievous personally oversaw the preparation of the large feast the village was soon going to indulge in and patiently awaited his son's return. Sometimes the great hunt could take anywhere from 12 hours to 3 days. It all depended on the warrior in question. If Grievous were the betting type, he'd have all of his credits down that Zikalov's return would be within the next 6 hours. Regardless, the cyborg Kalish had no doubt that his son would return victoriously. In the meantime, there was other party business he had to take care of. -4 hours later, much to the villagers' surprise, Zikalov and his 2 friends returned far sooner than expected. The two boys, Seran and Leniel, had already tied down the carcasses of the Karabekh to makeshift stretchers and dragged their trophies back to the village. Zikolov dragged the muumuu on another stretcher behind him that he killed after wrapping them up in vines. He didn't need any of his friends to help him kill them. They did shoot one of the Karabekh that would have rammed its sharp horn into his back while he had been battling two others in a glade. He was most fortunate that they had been there with him. The other two Kalish boys had been perched up in the tall trees watching the fight from above. Leniel had his Zaka arms outland rifle slung across his back and shouted down at Zikolov that danger was approaching. The son of Grievous couldn't hear him above the constant roars of the two beasts he was fighting. Zikolov was having a difficult time handling two of them at once and failed to notice the third creeping up behind him. Seran cursed and fumbled with his rifle. He took aim and followed the beast's movement with the length of his barrel. He waited for the perfect shot. He watched as the Karabekh charged, about to skewer his friend, and squeezed the trigger. A powerful energy blast lit up the shadows beneath the canopy of trees, and with a loud blam the vicious beast fell dead. They had been instructed to keep their distance from the young hunter and simply observe, acting as Zikolov's support should he need it. That was the only beast they killed during the duration of Zikolov's hunt. Seran and Leniel half expected to aid Zikolov in killing a couple muumuu, but Shilil's son already knew how to fell the deadly predators thanks to his past experience. That didn't mean that he returned without a scratch on him. One muumuu clawed his leg with its sharp talons. It wasn't a life-threatening injury, but it certainly needed mending. He ripped off a part of us tunic and used it to bind the wound. He had a slight limp, but he didn't let that stop him. Fortune was on his side because that particular muumuu had been the last one he was instructed to hunt, and it happened to be the last one in the entire pack. Zikolov wiped his bloodied spear on the grass and disinfected it in the water of a running stream. There was no need to attract any other predators. Once they caught sight of the villagers, the energy gate was opened and they were granted passage. The elder warriors guarding the village were the first to congratulate them. They finally made it to the central plaza where the rest of the villagers were awaiting them. They cheered as Leniel and Seran helped to present Zikolov's hard-earned prizes. Grievous stood tall on the stage and raised his cybernetic hands to silence the crowd. When he spoke, his pride for his son was unmistakable. The great hunt is complete. Young Zikolov has passed the test. He is now a full-fledged hunter, but most importantly a warrior of this clan. Grievous nodded at Tekar to finish the speech as the tribesmen took the stage. Grievous came to stand nearby with a bowl of blue paint while Tekar spoke, ready to complete the ritual ceremony. Zikolov Quilamek Shilil is no longer considered a young child in the eyes of our people. Celebrate, for he is now an adolescent. Grievous stepped forward until he was in front of his son and took a clawed digit and carefully marked the Kalish warrior symbol on Zikolov's chest and ran vertical lines down the boy's face with the blue ceremonial paint. He set the bowl of paint on the stage and turned to face the crowd with his son. Grievous gently took Zikolov's arm and raised it high in victory. Tekar quieted the crowd again, and when he spoke his voice too was filled with pride. Celebrate, for this boy has proven himself worthy of the highest honors our village can bestow. For the first time in our history apart from Shilil, Zikolov has surpassed our expectations and completed the great hunt in the least amount of time and returned with only one comrade assist. Tekar handed Grievous the two items in question that would forever seal his son's graduation ceremony and ultimately bestow upon him the honor of chief hunter among the village. Usually it would be the boy's mother that would be the one to do this. Grievous was proud to be the one all the same, although he still couldn't stop the small pang of sorrow from squeezing at his still beating heart as he thought of his dearly departed Kitna. Zikolov's father placed a simple, black, corded necklace that had a single muumuu claw that every new warrior wore over Zikolov's head, where it rested proudly around his son's neck. The weight of the claw against his chest filled the young Kalish with great pride. The second was a necklace with muumuu teeth, which was only given to those who graduated with the highest honors. The villagers clapped and offered up cries of congratulations. The party had begun. They enjoyed a large feast that comprised of fried carbache, roasted karabec, biscuits, an assortment of native vegetables, fruits, and much to Zikalov's delight they even had quebec. It was the most delicious food the teenager had ever tasted in all his life. He was very happy to learn that there would be 2 more banquets in his honor within the next 5 days. The young warrior would also craft a new war mask in that time, as was also tradition for a graduated hunter. The son of Grievous was already formulating ideas on how he wanted it to look. Soon it came time for Zikalov to open the gifts from the villagers. He received his own Shoni spear, Zaka Arms Outland rifle, a brown cloak, a traditional hunter's outfit, a blanket crafted from a mumu's hide, and a handcrafted bandana emblazoned with his clan's symbol. He graciously thanked his people. Then he opened the gift his father had for him. He pulled apart the wrappings and gasped in disbelief. "No way, father, is this really for me?" Grievous nodded. "Yes." There in Zikalov's lap lay twin swords, the 2 swords that looked near identical to the ones that adorned his father's statue in the temple. They looked a little worn, like they had seen a few great battles, but they still looked pretty battle-worthy nonetheless. "Are these yours?" They were. "In what I now consider a past life. They are yours now." "I don't understand. Why didn't you give these to one of my elder brothers or sisters?" "They all crafted their own. It's not tradition for parents to pass down weapons until the parent in question has succumbed to death." "Father, you aren't dead. You cannot give me these." "I did die, Zikalov. I'm not the same Kalish I once was." Grievous almost sounded remorseful. This had to be the first time in all of Zikalov's life that he had ever heard the slightest ounce of sadness coming from the general of the droid armies. Zikalov used the Force to discreetly sense what else his father was feeling, and was pleased when he felt his father's genuine pride for him and his great desire that he should take them. That's when Zikalov realized that the twin swords in his lap were his father's most prized possessions, apart from his lightsaber trophies. Grievous told Zikalov stories of great valor concerning his son's elder siblings, a few of which had already reached adulthood. For the young Kalish teen he was absolutely baffled. He was the youngest. Shouldn't the eldest child receive these swords? "Why did you choose me?" Zikalov whispered with wide eyes. "You have earned them. While it's true that the rest of our family are fierce warriors, you turned out to be the most like me. It's only fitting that you claim them as your own." Zikalov knelt down on one knee and lowered his head in reverent respect. "Thank you, father. This means a lot to me. I will handle them with care." In addition to the swords, his father presented a thick, tear-resistant, leather chest piece for Zikalov to wear in order to sheath the swords on his back. Amazingly enough, it was a perfect fit after a slight adjustment. He bore the swords on his back with pride and smiled. General Grievous then revealed a grand secret. "The swords I gave you are not ordinary. They were made from a cortosis alloy and can deflect a lightsaber." "No way. Seriously?" "Yes. Those swords have been known to kill a few Jedi. There was a small band of Jedi that infiltrated Cali during the Huck War. They fought beside our enemy and they died on the ends of those blades," Grievous chortled in dark pleasure. He loved recalling that battle. He used those blades before he collected his very first lightsaber trophy. That had to be one of his favorite memories. "I will be sure to keep these with me. I'm sure they will see battle again," Zikalov promised. "Indeed. Those blades will never cease to thirst for the blood of another Jedi." Grievous laughed in wicked delight and was glad that he hadn't broken down into a hacking cough. "I will bring honor to you and the rest of our family." "You already have. I am proud that you have chosen to continue your new official career. Those swords will serve you well, son." Grievous placed a hand on Zikalov's shoulder. Zikalov nodded in agreement and then gathered his other newly treasured gifts and stowed them on board the Dark Shadow for when they returned to his father's flagship. He was honored to carry his father's swords now that he knew more of their history. Since the war against the Republic was still raging, Zikaloff requested that his acquired personal possessions apart from the swords currently sheathed on his back be left within the safety of Grievous's new hidden lair located in a remote outer rim system. A place his father had yet to reveal to him. Grievous noticed Zikaloff's injured leg and called the master healer of their village. In no time his son had rejoined his friends as if the injury had never taken place. The Kalish cyborg sighed. His other children had grown much in his absence while he had been away fighting in what felt like a never-ending war. He could only image what they looked like now. His eldest child, his first daughter Rondaru, reached adulthood 2 years prior. He felt a pang of remorse that he missed out on a lot of important milestones for his other children. Grievous was broken out of his internal reverie by the laughter of his 13-year-old son. Zikaloff sounded and appeared not as the Sith apprentice he was trained to be, but a true son of Kali. He watched his youngest son, his very last child, animatedly share stories of his past adventures and the victory over the slain Jedi Padawan with gusto. The other village teens were intrigued and riveted by Zikaloff's storytelling, whereas the adults glanced at the newly christened teen with an admiring eye and occasional smile. The Kalish warlord thanked the stars that he could at least do this much for his son. He felt it was destiny, not a random twist of fate, that his youngest child had ended up falling right into his lap when he first found him on Yavin as a very small boy. Grievous cherished the time he had with his son and was grateful that Zikaloff had entered his life. He shuddered to think what would have become of his child had the Jedi succeeded in training Zikaloff after his kidnapping from Kali those years ago. The infamous Jedi Slayer hated to admit it to himself, but if his son had ever become a Jedi, he would have had no choice but to destroy Zikaloff. His son, it seemed, was destined to walk beside him. Soon father and son were caught up in the celebration festivities and wished that their time on Kali would never end. Anakin was beyond furious. The council shut him out. They knew something and weren't telling him. Anakin nearly kicked around the council chamber doors once he saw his Padawan's body that the other Jedi had found in the industrial sector, so he could demand they hunt the Sith down and destroy him. Ahsoka had been pierced through by a lightsaber blade. That wasn't all they found at the scene. 2 hands had been found as well. Hands that Anakin knew belonged to the Kalish boy. At least his Padawan dealt the Sith apprentice that excruciating blow. For Anakin, that wound wasn't enough. He swore to avenge her. No matter the cost. In the meantime he tinkered with his ship the Twilight. Fixing things oftentimes helped to alleviate some of his pain, but right now, it just wasn't helping. His master gave him space and allowed Anakin to grieve. Anakin was very grateful for that. He hid his emotions from everyone around him and shut out anyone that approached him with their condolences. He was still trying to come to terms that his Padawan was really gone. His feelings ran deep and the Jedi frowned upon such sentiments. Which is why he spent most of his time in the hangar bays. Obi-Wan approached him a few days later and handed him an envelope with a deep frown. Anakin, the council sent me to deliver this to you. This envelope was found with your Padawan's body. It is addressed to you. We believe the Sith child named Zikaloff wrote it. The council wasn't sure it was in your best interest to have it since you went against the Jedi Code and formed an attachment with your Padawan. It may contain sensitive information that may provoke a personal retaliation which the council has forbidden. Rest assured that the council did not read it. Anakin dropped the tools he was currently holding and wiped his grease-smeared hands on a nearby towel and sat up to take the envelope from Obi-Wan. He stuffed the envelope in his tunic pocket and returned to his tinkering. Obi-Wan was baffled by his apprentice's behavior. Aren't you going to read it? Yes, but I prefer to read it alone. Anakin gave Obi-Wan a pointed look. His master took the hint and turned to leave. Suit yourself, Anakin. If you need to talk, I'll be in the mess hall. Anakin nodded curtly and focused his attention on his work and watched his master walk away out of the corner of his eye. Once Obi-Wan was gone, he wasted no time in ripping the letter out. His eyes hungrily read each word and he was shaken by the content. It was the last thing he'd ever imagined reading. His hate was soon replaced with absolute dread as a knot of fear sank into the pit of his stomach. Skywalker, if you are reading this letter, then I have successfully slain your Padawan. She is the first of many Jedi yet to come that shall fall by my hand. Have you gone yet to the Hall of Records to study my history? It would benefit you if you did. And Skywalker, I know your secret. I know your fears. I've seen your dreams. You have glimpsed the future. You know the answer to the question that's plagued you night after night. Who is Leia's mother? You see her every day in secret away from prying eyes. Yes. I know all about your wife Padme. You fear losing her and your future daughter. Do not worry. I personally have no interest in harming her. Luckily for you, she isn't a Jedi. Remember the Jedi Code? Allow your worst fears to consume you and you will fall into darkness. Skywalker, you've already begun. You seek vengeance for what I've done. That is one step closer to the dark side. Your fear and hate are what eventually turn you into the galaxy's most feared Sith aside from your future master. Your future name is Darth Vader. It is a future you've never seen. Why do you suppose that is? What will become of your family should the darkness consume you? Think on that. Zekalov. His heart was hammering by the time he finished reading it. Anakin couldn't stop the shiver of fear from racing down his spine and wiped a sweaty palm on the side of his pants leg. It was a damn good thing the Jedi Council hadn't read the letter. He stuffed it back into his pocket and shoved his tools back into the toolbox sitting beside him. He had one destination in mind. He began to run and ignored the shouts of dismay from the few people he apologetically shoved aside in his haste. The anxiety he felt took his breath away, but that didn't stop him. If anything, it fueled his urgency. He picked up speed and didn't stop for anything or for anyone. Soon he reached it. The Hall of Records. Anakin took in a deep breath and let it out. It was time to study. Chapter 26. All too soon, it was time for General Grievous and Zekalov to return to the Invisible Hand. The young teen couldn't believe that 2 weeks had already gone by. Father and son wished their village farewell and left their home planet of Cali with deep resignation. If only they could stay. Unfortunately, they were at war, and both father and son were bound by duty. Grievous told Zekalov that a few years before his son's birth, he'd made a deal with the intergalactic banking clan that if he submitted to the cyborg changes after his accident and led the droid armies, the organization would supply a relief effort to their planet. While Sheel's clan were currently well taken care of, there were still hundreds of thousands of other Kaleesh worldwide that still starved. The general vowed to put an end to his people's suffering permanently. Once they landed and strode down the landing ramp of the Dark Shadow, Grievous stopped his son by gently grabbing his shoulder. "I have a surprise for you," Grievous intoned with a dark purr as his mind wandered to his 6 prisoners. He wondered how they fared. Hopefully they were in decent enough shape for Zekalov's grand appearance. He needed to check with Ripped Claw first and receive his latest report. "I need to first make sure it's ready. I will summon you when the time comes," Grievous chuckled darkly while rubbing his clawed digits together. "Yes, Father. In the meantime I must transmit my report to Lord Dooku and await my next assignment." "Do what you must. I will be on the bridge." Grievous turned away from him and left the hangar. Zekalov went to his own private quarters where he placed his coming-of-age gifts. Then he went to a comm terminal and contacted his Sith master. "Greetings, my master. My leave of absence has ended. What is your next command?" Count Dooku's image briefly flickered. "It's time for you to embark upon your quest to Korriban. You will leave your current lightsaber behind you. You may choose a replacement weapon that is not of Jedi or Sith origin for this mission. Your task is simple. You will go into the Crystal Cave and retrieve your very own lightsaber crystal. Then you will proceed to the Tomb of Razor where you will retrieve an artifact of your choosing. It will be perilous, mark my words. Once you have completed your assignment, return to my enclave." "As you wish, my master," Zekalov bowed before cutting the transmission. Well, he already had his replacement weapons on hand. He felt ready enough. Before he could embark on his journey, he had to wait for the surprise his father had for him. What could it possibly be? The twin swords his father passed down to him at his ceremony had been surprise enough. What was his father up to? He would just have to wait and find out. Zikolov pulled out a star map and studied it closely as he planned and charted his course to the infamous Sith planet. He was going to take the Dark Shadow. He didn't know what he would find within the tombs, but he knew it would be wise to prepare himself for anything. He made sure his father's twin swords were well sharpened and sheathed them on his back. He finished plotting his course within the Navi computer and ran a pre-flight inspection on his ship in advance as he waited for his father to call him. Once he was finished, he lounged around his personal quarters and watched the Hall of It. His prosthetic hands still felt strange and alien at times. It would take some getting used to. Before he knew it, he drifted into a much-needed rest. Revis punched a nearby wall, leaving an indentation of a fist. He was not happy with the report Ripclaw had given him. "What do you mean one of the clones perished? I told you to keep them alive until I returned." Grievous raged as he towered above his torture droid. "Yes, Master, but you did order that they suffer torture methods 3 through 13. The experiments yielded promising results. The clone that did not survive the experimentations was not as strong as the others. He possessed a genetic flaw that made him more susceptible to death via an airborne pathogen." "You released an airborne pathogen into the clone's torture chambers?" "No, Master. The airborne pathogen is the result of the experimental virus I injected him with. The new virus is ready for deployment. The other clones have received an antidote and have rested well enough for your return," Ripclaw bowed, hoping he appeased his master. It was unfortunate that his primary test subject did not survive, but his death ensured the destruction of the clone army. "Is this virus dangerous to any other life form?" "No, Master. It is lethal only to clones." "Will my son require a vaccination?" "No." "Good. Make sure our guests are presentable. I wish for my son to greet them in person." "Yes, Master." Ripclaw left to do as he was commanded. General Grievous couldn't wait to see his son's expression when he saw how helpless his captives were. The clones were going to suffer, and the general was going to stop at nothing to ensure that they did. Soon it became time to summon Zikolov. He hoped his son liked his gift. Zikolov jolted awake when his comlink chimed, alerting him to an incoming call. He answered it. He soon learned that his gift was ready. "Okay, I'm on my way." He stretched stiff muscles and reluctantly picked himself off of his plush couch and left his quarters to meet his father in the detention block. He was curious. His father was obviously going to show him one of the prisoners, but why? "There are a few old friends of yours that would like to see you," Grievous chortled with dark amusement. The door slid open to the cell in question and they both entered the dimly lit room. Zikolov gasped and stopped cold mid-stride when his reptilian eyes landed on the prisoners. His father captured Renegade Squad. Zikolov felt his blood turn to ice and couldn't stop the tendril of fear from squeezing at his heart, making his body feel clammy as flashbacks of his torture at their hands resurfaced. His heart pounded loudly in his ears, his mouth went dry, it became increasingly difficult to breathe, and he felt sick to his stomach. The clones were stripped of their armor and were shackled in chains to the wall, some sitting and others standing. They were wearing military-issued tank tops and shorts. Their dog tags hung loosely around their necks with their individual serial numbers engraved on them. The names the clones chose for themselves were absent from their identification badges, stripping them of their personal identities and making them slaves to a system. They were numbers now, not people. Many of them appeared to have undergone extensive torture methods. It was a wonder that they still lived. "Greetings, clones. We regret to inform you that one of your peers is now deceased. You remember young Zikolov here, don't you?" The clones remained silent and looked dismally up at the general, with the exception of one clone who hung almost limply in his chains. He was moaning as if he were in pain. Ripclaw stood behind the general and awaited his orders. "What is wrong with that clone, Ripclaw?" Nothing. I gave each and every one of them a vaccination. None of them are prone to experiencing ill side effects. This clone is attempting to deceive you. Ripclaw chuckled darkly. General Grievous stalked further into the room. He effortlessly ripped off the prisoner's chains, wrapped a large duranium hand around his throat, and lifted the deceitful clone high into the air while mildly choking him. You are a fool, clone. If you thought you could actually escape with that ruse. You can't blame a desperate fool for trying, Skid spat in Grievous's masked face. With a chilling roar, Grievous threw the clone across the room where he painfully struck a wall. You have volunteered, foolish one. To be the first. Renegade Squad watched on wide-eyed, while silently asking the same question simultaneously. The first for what? Zekalov, don't be shy, come greet our guests. Zekalov remained rooted to the spot and stared at his father all the while fighting the urge to run away. The flashbacks he was experiencing were giving him great anxiety. He knew to disobey his father would lead to unpleasant repercussions, so he obediently went to stand beside Grievous. Zekalov, you have one simple task. Do to these clones what they have done to you. Starting with this one. It is your honor and your right. His father wanted him to torture unarmed opponents. He stood completely frozen with uncertainty. What should he do? The young Kalish did want to see justice done upon his abusers, but would torturing them make him any better than those wicked clones? I'm not giving you a choice, son. I order you to obey my command. After what felt like a long agonizing aeon, the young warrior responded. Yes, father. General Grievous looked at the captives and chortled with amusement before he left the room with Ripclaw in tow. Now you learn what becomes of those who torture innocent children for pleasure. The cell door closed and locked behind the general, leaving Zekalov alone in the dim lighting of Renegade Squad's torture chamber. Skids was still free of any restraints and scrambled to his feet and kept his distance from the Kalish teen. Zekalov looked at them with a critical eye and shook his head. I warned you that this would happen when you took me to that warehouse, Zekalov admonished softly. He glanced up into the camera mounted in the corner of the room and knew that his father was probably going to be watching his every move. The clones remained motionless. Zekalov's ears were graced with a deafening silence. I hold no love, compassion, or mercy for any of you. I cannot give you freedom, but I will give you a fighting chance. Unlike you cowards, I have a sense of honor. If your comrade over there manages to beat me, I will let you out of this prison cell. Should he fail, you are doomed to whatever future fate my father has in store for you. Zekalov turned and glared in Skid's direction. You, clone. Which one are you? I can never keep track, you all look the same. Zekalov smirked with dark satisfaction when Skid's face contorted into one of contempt. The young Kalish made a waving gesture, inviting the prisoner to come at him. Your move, clone. My name is Skids. I'm not going to fight you. Really? That does surprise me. You were all too eager to torture me to the brink of death while I was an unarmed, helpless child. Are you afraid to fight without the assistance of your comrades? I do not require their assistance. Then what are you waiting for? Now is your chance. Defeat me and you will be a hero in the eyes of your brethren over there. I'm not going to attack a helpless child. That never stopped you before. Believe me when I say, I'm far from helpless and I am no longer a child in the eyes of my people. Zekalov growled deeply as he took a few, menacing steps forward. The other clones began to voice their encouragement and cheered Skids on. Come on Skids, you can take him. We know you've got what it takes, trooper. Claim victory and free us, brother. Skids shook his head and sat down heavily on the floor. Skids, what are you doing, man? Get up, soldier, that's an order. Zekalov snickered with wicked amusement. He had to admit, he was starting to enjoy himself. Are you really going to disappoint your comrades by just giving up? Unlike them, Zekalov, I never wanted a part in your kidnapping or the abuse they had in mind for you. Is that so? That's not how I remember it. Zikolov snarled as he balled his hands into fists. You must believe me. I didn't want to do it. Honest. Did that torture droid damage your criffing brain? You helped torture me. Willingly. With an anguished scream, Zikolov hurled himself at the helpless clone and punched him hard in the face. The unexpected blow stunned the trooper, and Zikolov took the window of opportunity to leg sweep Skids and then kicked him in the stomach, knocking the wind out of him. You will pay for what you did to me, you heartless monster. Zikolov snarled as he circled his opponent like a Firaxan shark ready to strike. Skids finally accepted the fact that he would be unable to avoid the coming conflict and prepared to defend himself. He high-blocked one of Zikolov's punches. Skids attempted to deliver his own punch, but it was side-blocked by the Kalish teen. They traded and blocked a flurry of punches, knife hands, roundhouse kicks, and leg sweeps. Zikolov somersaulted over the clone's head and delivered a well-executed back kick in Skids' stomach, immediately dropping the weakened clone. Skids was out of breath and his strength had diminished. Get up and fight me. Zikolov raged as he got into a fighting stance. You win. Kid. The Kalish boy looked down upon the clone with disgust. He'd hoped for a challenge. Then you've labeled yourself a failure in the eyes of your people. You've signed your entire squad's death warrants. Zikolov softly murmured as he made a move to walk away. Skids relaxed, believing it was over, but was caught unawares when the Kalish teen did the unexpected. Zikolov turned and kicked the clone in the face, knocking him out cold. He looked at the rest of the prisoners, many of which had expressions ranging from disbelief, horror, and despair as the realization that their chance at freedom was lost forever. The Kalish teen dragged the unconscious clone's body across the room and chained him up again. All right, who's next? He frowned with a glare as he sized up the others. Go ahead, kid. Torture us the way we tortured you. What will that prove? You'll be no better than us, Rusty sneered. Zikolov turned his head to give him a chilling look. The dark gleam in Zikolov's eyes began to make Rusty wish he'd never spoken. Have you ever heard the saying an eye for an eye? Same concept, Rusty, is it? I promise you that justice will be served. Don't think for a second that I had forgotten all about you. Zikolov growled down at him with a glare. He took a few steps forward and raised his arm in Rusty's direction and slowly bent his fingers inward. The clone's eyes widened and looked ready to explode out of his skull as an invisible hand slowly began to crush his larynx. He choked and sputtered. He tried to claw at his throat with his chained hands, but the chains wouldn't allow him to reach that far. Finally he was released. He coughed and wheezed as he struggled to inhale air to revive his starved lungs. What you just experienced is called a force choke. It's fun to experience, isn't it? I've been on the receiving end of such a trick myself. Once the clone leader finally recovered, he glared hatefully at the boy. It's a lovely trick. Go ahead and indulge yourself and prove to everyone here that you are no better than me, Rusty sneered. No, Rusty. I am better than you. I gave your friend over there a fighting chance, didn't I? That was more than any of you had given me. Now you will suffer the consequences of your transgressions. Don't worry though, I think I'll save you for last. Zikolov walked over to a nearby table that had an assortment of torture tools and picked up a blaster pistol and a shock baton. He stood in the center of the room and used the force to release Clapper from his restraints. The metal chains fell to the floor with a heavy clank. You're next. Zikolov used the shock baton to gesture for Clapper to step away from the other clones. Clapper slowly walked away and stood nervously about 2 yards from the boy. He wasn't sure what the hell he was supposed to do now. Did the kid want him to fight him? As if the Kalish teen could read his thoughts, he answered his internal question. You do not get the privilege to fight me. As I said earlier, your chance at freedom rested with your unconscious comrade over there. He failed to defeat me in hand-to-hand combat. Now you will endure what you made me suffer. Zikolov felt no remorse and held no pity for the clones. They were villains. Criminals. They deserved the pain that was coming to them. Without a second thought, he lowered the blaster pistol and shot the clone in the leg, earning an agonized scream from the clone. Clapper fell down, clutching the wound with a hiss of pain. Zikolov slowly circled the clone and kicked him a few times. Then he used the shock baton and repeatedly struck Clapper until the clone was bruised, bloodied, and on the brink of unconsciousness. Zikolov used the force to shove the clone back against the wall and to his awaiting chains. After he was restrained again, he turned his back on Renegade Squad. He stopped after taking a few steps when the soft voice of one of the clones he hadn't yet tortured reached his ears. Is this truly justice? Or is it revenge? The young Kalish teen turned his head back to glance at the clone. I believe it's both, Zikolov muttered as he partially lowered his head in what appeared to be silent remorse. Why are you the one doing this? Why doesn't your father? He hadn't really wanted to be the one. He did it because his father had so ordered it. The young teen neared the door and didn't look back. He paused for a moment, just a few inches shy of the opening mechanism, before answering him. That doesn't concern you. You can be sure, however, that whatever I do to you is considered a mercy. Should you end up on the receiving end of my father's wrath, you will wish I'd finished the job, he murmured softly before making his exit. The door swished shut and locked in place again. Zikolov stood silently in the corridor and ignored the bustling of droids around him. He began to walk down the hallway and made it halfway to his quarters before his father found him. General Grievous growled at his son as he grabbed him roughly by the shoulder. He gruffly slapped Zikolov across the face but was mindful not to severely hurt him. The Kalish teen over the course of time knew to look his father in the eye when on the receiving end of a punishment. Zikolov, I gave you one simple task and you failed to complete it. Why didn't you continue? There are now 2 clones left that will suffer without your guiding hand. Zikolov knew what would become of the clones should he truly leave them now. He couldn't allow his father to kill them, not yet. He narrowed his golden-hued eyes at his father. I was on my way to my room to retrieve the training saber you gave me years ago. On the highest setting it can cause far more pain than any shock baton. I will finish with them after I've completed my mission for Count Dooku. General Grievous stood baffled with wide eyes and then turned his head away with regret. He had jumped to conclusions. I apologize. You are very clever to implement such a torture strategy. I think I shall add the training saber to Ripclaw's collection, Grievous nodded in approval. Zikolov felt his rigid body relax a notch and gave his father a half-smile. Keep them alive until I return. The Kalish teen poked Grievous's chest armor in silent warning with narrowed eyes. The general found the action a bit amusing. How many times had he himself done the same to incompetent battle droids? As you wish, son. Grievous growled softly. Deep down he was itching to deal with Renegade Squad himself, but his son had been their victim. It was only fair that Zikolov be given the opportunity to avenge himself. Before I depart, I need to practice my forms. Would you like to accompany me to the training hall? The general nodded with smiling eyes. It had been a long time since he had trained with his son. There were many things his son now knew that Grievous had yet to see. Sure, they practiced a little sparring on Utapau before Zikolov's first duel with Ahsoka Tano, but the Kalish cyborg had yet to witness firsthand the full result of his son's training. They both went to the training hall. Zikolov left his lightsaber in his quarters and went with the twin cortosis-laden swords. His father taught him Form I, Shicho, before he'd ever been sent to his master's hidden enclave. It consisted of very basic, simplistic parrying, fencing, and practice drills. Thanks to Dooku's instruction, he already mastered Form 2, since it was the very same form his master constantly used. Form 2, known as Makoshi, provided him with precise and very efficient lightsaber techniques as well as agile footwork. That form was geared more towards lightsaber dueling rather than blocking blaster bolts. Then there was Form 4, Ataru. That form generated aggressive strength and attack moves. Thanks to both his father and Dooku's instruction, Zikolov had mastered Forms 1, 2, and 4. It was a combination of all three forms that helped him achieve his final victory over his slain Jedi adversary. He was also becoming adept at Form V, Shin/Jumso, which was a form that required highly aggressive speed and agility. It provided Zikalov with very tight and aggressive motions. He still had much to learn before he came even remotely close to mastering that one. There were a few lightsaber techniques he derived from that form to duel Ahsoka with. Ironically, Form V was the same form Anakin Skywalker used. Maybe that was why Dooku had been teaching him that one. His master would undoubtedly continue his instruction once he returned from his quest on Korriban. Darth Tyrannus promised to teach his young student Forms 6 and 7 in due time once he completed his Sith trials. Zikalov had a long way to go before he would be granted that honor. Zikalov and General Grievous fluidly practiced the forms the Kaleesh teen was already familiar with to warm up before the actual sparring session. Zikalov's form was flawless and it garnered his father's admiring eye. His son had learned much while he had been kept hidden away within Dooku's fortress on the moon of Hulma. The young Kaleesh used both blades when the time came for their sparring match. His son had grown so fast. It felt like it had only been yesterday that a 7-year-old Zikalov had held a single-handed training saber. The young Sith apprentice bowed graciously to his father in respect once they were finished and smiled. He sheathed his swords on his back and adjusted the gauntlets on his forearms. "Thank you, Father, for assisting me with my preparations. I believe I'm ready to embark upon my quest now." "Go, son. May the gods smile down upon you." Before he knew what he was even doing, the general of the droid armies pulled young Zikalov against him in an embrace. His father was hugging him as if he would never see him again. Zikalov stood stunned, completely speechless. Slowly, the young teen wrapped his arms around his father and returned the embrace. He was so thankful that there had been no witnesses to view that display of pure, public affection. The proud, warrior version of Zikalov was appalled and rather embarrassed that his father had done such a thing, and yet, the young child within Zikalov was happy that he had. "We'll see each other again. I promise," the young Kaleesh assured him. He turned his back on his father and went to his room. He donned the brown cloak that the villagers had given him at his ceremony, picked up his Zaka Arms Outland rifle, and went to the dark shadow. "Korriban, here I come," the Kaleesh teen muttered beneath his breath. Zikalov maneuvered his ship out of the docking bay, and with the flip of a switch, the star line outside the ship stretched and appeared to snap as he blasted away into lightspeed.